Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to Isa for the opportunity to speak today. I'm very sorry I can't be in Frascati, so I'm speaking to you from a slightly chilly Geneva this morning. So I'm the Urban Resilience Coordinator based at the Group on Earth Observations here in Geneva. I'm going to talk about heat today, and a few of the other speakers have already touched on heat waves, extreme heat, and the health impacts from that. But what I'd like to do today is just describe or introduce really a service that GEO is developing or looking to develop, which is going to kind of help cities understand the health-related impacts from heat and hopefully point to some of the solutions that they can adopt to become more heat resilient. Now, I think GEO is not quite a household name, so just a quick explanation of who the Group on Earth Observations is. We're an intergovernmental partnership. We're hosted here in Geneva by the World Meteorological Organization. The general sort of mandate, if you like, given to us by 115 or so national governments is to promote the open and equitable use of Earth observations to guide policy decisions, essentially. So to try and address some of society's biggest challenges as set out in things like the Sustainable Development Goals, Sendai Framework, Paris Agreement, etc. Alongside the 115 or so national governments, we have around 160 or so private sector civil society organizations who are also interested in and active in the world of Earth observations, including, I should add, ESA, the European Environment Agency, the WHO, UNICEF, and possibly some of the others of you in the room. In November last year, we signed off on our next 10-year strategy from 2025 onwards, which is really, it's the third decade, if you like, of GEO being in existence, and it's a signal that we're moving towards something we're coining as Earth intelligence, where we're moving away from just talking about the data itself and the information that is generated through Earth observations to something more holistic, where we're basically looking to co-design and integrate a whole range of actors that operate or have an interest in Earth observations, from those on policy side, those with satellites in the air, those processing data, researchers and others who are producing analysis-ready data and things like that, to technology firms who are working on software and hardware that help us kind of interpret and apply some of those observations. Probably most importantly and central to the topic of the conversation today is trying to get end users, the users of these tools and approaches, really involved from the outset in the design of some of the solutions that we can leverage from Earth observations. So as an extension of that, and one of two initiatives that GEO is currently developing, is a project we're calling the Global Heat Resilience Service. Ultimately, this is going to try and address what we've recognized as a kind of data, information, knowledge gap, where cities are concerned, in particular in relation to understanding and then acting on the health-related risks from exposure to extreme heat. This service is currently being developed by GEO and the WMO as our kind of core partner, addressing the 3 Sustainable Development Goals we heard about this morning, 3, 11 and 13. And we're at a kind of early stage where we're currently looking for other partners to help us think through what this service could and should do, and to try and really think about those different groups who work across the Earth observation value chain to be able to develop a solution that is useful to cities. I guess I won't labor the point about why are we interested in heat. We've heard a lot today about things like the increase in exposure to heat and the combination of both climate change and urbanization when it comes to seeing greater numbers of people exposed and sensitive to climate hazards like heat. But this slide, I think, is really just to get across that there's something like 500,000 avoidable deaths each year that we estimate, a very crude estimate, I think, in relation to exposure to extreme heat. And of all of the climate hazards, if you like, heat is the one where we're seeing the greatest increase in exposure. That said, a lot of deaths and illness from heat are avoidable. And one thing that we are looking to do through the design of this service is to understand how we can kind of prevent some of these risks manifesting in the first place, so we're not playing a kind of catch-up game with treating illnesses and stresses during heat events. Twin challenge of climate change and urbanization. So this slide, I think, is just trying to show that we have, there's a concentration. I mean, cities are particularly vulnerable to exposure to extreme heat events, extreme heat and extreme heat events, partly by a product of the nature of the built environment, concentration of lots of people living in close proximity in buildings and around infrastructure constructed from concrete, asphalt, glass, metal. Globally, I guess we see the concentration of that exposure in a couple of regions. Unsurprisingly, those found in the kind of equatorial regions, tropical regions, Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Also, those parts of the world where we may find cities, local governments who are maybe the least stable, have the least capacity, least resources to be able to both understand those risks and then, take decisions, investments that will actually help reduce risk. I guess in order for cities to be able to understand these risks and do something, we're talking about having access or increasing access to certain types of data that help them understand that challenge. I think this slide is useful in kind of highlighting the current level of inequality when it comes to access to things like urban heat island mapping or urban heat vulnerability mapping. The image on the left is really, I would say, in most cases, the best baseline that most cities will have in terms of understanding how heat plays out both in space and time across their jurisdictions. This is typically quite coarse. It might show you, it might allow you to measure phenomena like temperature, certainly not heat, to speak to the point that that one of the other speakers made around how we measure heat. And this is in the city of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. On the right-hand side is the city that I'm sitting in, Geneva, where with one of the most livable cities in the world and probably one of the least expensive cities in the world, you also have a city administration that has a lot of resources at its disposal, is able to, for example, contract consultants to produce very high resolution, detailed heat vulnerability maps that both capture current conditions and also model those changes into the future. So this kind of gap, if you like, is something that we're trying to address through the design of the service. We recognize, though, it's more than just data and information, and I've heard that a few times today, that there's a wealth of information really on climate available and increasingly available. So I think it's not just a case of, it's a case of either knowing where that data is, how to access it, and how to integrate it into your decision-making processes. But ultimately, I think it's also about how you translate that evidence into policy and investment decisions, ensuring that in this case your city has the level of institutional capacity, skills, and training needed to understand and interpret some of those risks and think about what solutions might allow a city to moderate some of those risks. And also this idea that there's a general need to raise engagement and awareness around the risk from heat, particularly as heat is one of these kind of silent hazards that in many cases creeps up on people and it's too late to do anything about. So as we're thinking through the design of this service, we recognize that there are these kind of various components that we might need to build out in consultation with and with the participation of those living and working in cities, those who are both having to take decisions that allow them to adapt to changing climate, and also, yeah, as I say, translate some of that evidence into policy and investment decisions. At this stage, we've kind of got a schematic for what might go into this service. This is by no means set in stone. And in fact, this probably emphasizes the kind of data inputs more than it should, noting that we need lots of other types of support, capacity building, awareness raising, engagement, partnership building, such that the service, as we design and build it, includes some of these elements like meteorological and climate models, both top-down mapping of where people and infrastructure are in relation to hazards like heat, as well as the ability to incorporate sort of more localized, maybe community-led data collection or mapping exercises that help understand where, different socio-economic characteristics inform vulnerability to heat, as well as trying to incorporate other data sources like public health data. I know the time is up, so I'll just try and conclude here. The other thing that is a little bit vague at this point is what this service actually looks like. Is it going to be a sort of web-based platform that a city can interrogate, find their city, understand how climate change and urbanization is affecting its population's vulnerability to heat? Perhaps could also be something like an API that delivers trusted information on heat to cities and other users who want to ingest that information for use in their own systems. So really just to conclude, as I say, we're kind of at an early stage. We have a concept that we feel meets a recognized need, that there's a decision support gap or an evidence gap in terms of how cities understand heat-related risks. But really this is 2024 is where the kind of fun starts, if you like, and we're looking to convene all sorts of interested parties to help us think through the design of this service and probably quite quickly move to building it, testing it with a number of partner cities to ensure we end up with a service that is actually of use to people. I'll leave it there. There's some contact information if anyone wants any more information, but also happy to answer questions. Thanks very much.